A billionaire helps black twins in a hospital, only to discover their DNA matches missing heirs. What surprising family secret will be uncovered, changing everyone's lives? And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. The fluorescent lights of New York Presbyterian Hospital cast harsh shadows across Lucas Bennett's expensive suit as he made his annual inspection of the pediatric ward. As the hospital's biggest private donor, these visits were routine, but today felt different. The usual administrative entourage had fallen behind, leaving him alone with his thoughts as he observed the children's wing through the large observation windows. In room 407, two children caught his attention. Twins, around 10 years old, occupied opposite sides of the room but seemed connected by an invisible thread. The girl, sitting upright in her bed, moved her hands gracefully through the air despite the 4 lines restricting her movement. The boy, hunched over a sketchbook in the corner, appeared lost in his own world. Lucas found himself drawn to their room, something about their presence pulling him in like a magnet. The girl noticed him first, her movements pausing as she studied him with intelligent eyes. Her head was wrapped in a colorful scarf, but her face held a maturity that transcended her years. "You're doing ballet," Lucas said, recognizing the hand positions from his sister's childhood recitals. The girl's face brightened, transforming the sterile hospital room. "I'm Aaliyah," she replied, her voice clear and confident despite her frail appearance. "I'm practicing for when I get better. My teacher says muscle memory is important, so I practice every day." Lucas moved further into the room, noticing how Aaliyah's determination seemed to fill the space. "That's impressive dedication. How long have you been dancing?" "Since I was 4, she said, demonstrating a perfect port de bras. "Before we got sick, I was preparing for my first major recital. I'm going to do it as soon as I'm strong enough." The word "we" drew Lucas's attention to the boy in the corner. Unlike his sister's outgoing nature, the boy remained focused on his sketchbook, his pencil moving in swift, sure strokes across the paper. "That's my brother, Jaden," Aaliyah explained. "He's shy around new people, but he's amazing at drawing. Jaden, show him your sketch." Jaden looked up briefly, his eyes meeting Lucas's for a moment before returning to his work. But in that brief glance, Lucas saw the same fierce determination he'd recognized in Aaliyah. Without speaking, Jaden turned his sketchbook around. The drawing took Lucas's breath away. It wasn't the typical child's artwork. Jaden had captured the essence of the hospital room, transforming the sterile space into something hauntingly beautiful. The perspective was unusual, showing the room as if floating in space, with his sister's dance positions ghosted throughout the composition. Lucas moved closer to examine the drawing, noting the sophisticated use of shading and perspective. "This is extraordinary, Jaden. How long have you been drawing?" Jaden shrugged, but Aaliyah answered for him. "Forever. He draws everything. The doctors let him decorate our room with his sketches." Looking around, Lucas noticed the walls were indeed covered with Jaden's artwork, each piece telling a different story, from cityscapes to fantasy worlds. The talent was undeniable. A doctor entered the room, clipboard in hand, breaking the moment. Lucas stepped aside but found himself listening intently as the doctor reviewed the twins' latest test results. The medical terminology was complex, but the underlying message was clear. The twins' condition was rare and the treatment expensive. Without hesitation, Lucas stepped forward. "I'd like to speak with you about their treatment options, doctor." The words came naturally, driven by an instinct he couldn't explain. As he followed the doctor out of the room, Lucas glanced back at the twins. Aaliyah had resumed her dance practice, while Jaden had started a new sketch, but something had changed. A connection had formed, subtle but undeniable. In the hallway, Lucas learned the full extent of the twins' situation. Their condition was treatable but required expensive specialized care. The hospital had been providing basic treatment through various charitable programs, but the more advanced therapies they needed remained out of reach. "I'll cover all their medical expenses," Lucas stated, surprising himself with the immediacy of his decision. "Whatever they need, specialists, experimental treatments, anything that might help." The doctor's relief was visible, but Lucas barely noticed. His mind was already racing ahead, planning how to best help these children who had unexpectedly captured his attention. He didn't understand the pull he felt toward them, but he knew with absolute certainty that his life had just changed irrevocably. Looking through the window at the twins, Aaliyah practicing her dance moves with unwavering focus, Jaden creating worlds on paper, Lucas felt a strange sense of familiarity. He didn't yet know about their connection to his family's past or the storm of secrets his decision would unleash. For now, he only knew that these children needed help, and he was in a position to provide it. After several weeks of overseeing the twins' treatment, Lucas found himself in a dimly lit office with Sarah Martinez, the hospital's senior social worker. The wall behind her desk displayed numerous certificates, but Lucas's attention focused on the manila folder she placed between them. "Mr. Bennett, there's something unusual about the twins' background that we need to discuss," Sarah began, her professional demeanor masking what Lucas sensed was genuine concern. "During our standard background checks for long-term care patients, we discovered several inconsistencies in their documentation." Lucas leaned forward, his fingers drumming against his knee. "What kind of inconsistencies?" "Their birth certificates appear to have been altered," Sarah explained, opening the folder to reveal photocopied documents. The original records were sealed by court order, which is unusual for standard adoption cases. Additionally, there are gaps in their medical history that don't align with the information provided by their previous caregivers. The social worker's words triggered something in Lucas's memory, a conversation overheard years ago between his parents, hushed voices discussing the twins and protecting the family. At the time, he dismissed it as irrelevant, but now, "I'd like to run some DNA tests," Lucas said, surprising both Sarah and himself with the suddenness of the request. "With their guardian's permission, of course." Sarah's expression shifted. "That's another complexity, Mr. Bennett. The twins have been in the foster system since they were 3. Their last foster family relinquished custody when the medical bills became overwhelming. Technically, they're wards of the state." The revelation hit Lucas hard. These talented, resilient children had been navigating the system alone, their gifts nearly buried under the weight of their circumstances. "I can expedite the testing through private channels," he said. "How quickly can we get approval?" Within days, the DNA samples were collected and sent to a prestigious genetic testing facility. Lucas found himself checking his phone constantly, waiting for results that he somehow knew would change everything. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. Lucas was in his office, reviewing hospital renovation plans, when his private line rang. The geneticist's voice was clinical, professional, but her words sent a jolt through his system. "Mr. Bennett, the results show a significant genetic match between you and the twins. Based on the markers we've identified, they appear to be related to UT. Rough your paternal grandfather's line. The relationship is close enough to suggest they're likely first cousins once removed." Lucas sat in stunned silence, pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed falling into place. The twins' artistic talents mirroring those of his father's sister, their resilience reminiscent of his grandfather's legendary determination. Even their medical condition matched a rare genetic disorder documented in the Bennett family medical history. His hands trembling slightly, Lucas pulled up his family tree on his computer. There, in a branch he'd never paid much attention to, was a name: Alexander Bennett, his grandfather's younger brother who had disappeared decades ago, leaving behind a trail of rumors and unanswered questions. The implications were staggering. If the twins were indeed Alexander's grandchildren, they weren't just distant relatives, they were legitimate heirs to a portion of the Bennett fortune. A fortune that, Lucas now realized, had been redistributed under questionable circumstances after Alexander's disappearance. Joy and anxiety warred in his chest as he contemplated the ramifications. The twins deserved to know their heritage, to understand their place in the family's complex history. But Lucas had been raised on stories of the Bennett family's influence, of deals made in shadows and secrets kept at any cost. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. "Some doors are better left closed, Lucas. Some questions shouldn't be asked." But looking at the genetic proof before him, Lucas knew he couldn't walk away from this truth. He picked up his phone again, this time to call his family's longtime lawyer. Before he could share this information with the twins, he needed to understand exactly what they stood to inherit and who might want to keep them from claiming their birthright. As he waited for the call to connect, Lucas glanced at a recent photo of the twins on his desk. Aaliyah was showing Jaden a dance move, both of them laughing despite the hospital setting. They had already changed his life by awakening his protective instincts. Now he realized they might change everything else too. The lawyer's greeting snapped him back to the present. "James," Lucas said, his voice steady despite his racing thoughts, "I need everything you can find about Alexander Bennett's disappearance. And James, this stays between us. For now." The autumn morning painted Central Park in shades of gold and crimson as Lucas guided the twins through its winding paths. Aaliyah, stronger after weeks of advanced treatment, walked slowly but steadily, her eyes wide with wonder at the street performers practicing their routines. Jaden kept pace beside them, his sketchbook already filling with quick studies of the passing scenes. "I've never seen so many dancers in one place," Aaliyah breathed, watching a group of ballet students warming up near the fountain. Lucas noticed how her hands automatically moved to mirror their positions, muscle memory taking over despite her months away from formal practice. "Would you like to watch them for a while?" Lucas asked, already steering them toward a nearby bench. The twins had been cleared for short outings, their doctors agreeing that the mental health benefits outweighed the risks. Still, Lucas kept a careful eye on their energy levels, ready to call their driver at the first sign of fatigue. As they settled on the bench, Jaden opened his sketchbook to a fresh page. His pencil moved swiftly, capturing the dancers' fluid movements in bold, confident strokes. Lucas watched over his shoulder, amazed at how the boy could translate motion into static lines while preserving all the energy of the original movement. "I'm scared sometimes," Aaliyah said suddenly, her voice quiet but clear. "Not of being sick, I'm used to that. I'm scared of forgetting how to dance. Every day I can't practice properly, I feel like I'm losing a little bit of what I learned." Lucas turned to her, seeing the worry creasing her young forehead. "Your body remembers," he assured her. "It's like riding a bicycle. Once you learn it, really learn it, it stays with you." "Did you ever dance?" Jaden asked, speaking up for the first time that morning. His question surprised Lucas. It was rare for the boy to initiate conversation. "No, but my sister did. She had to stop for almost a year after an accident, but when she went back, it all came back to her. Different, maybe, but still there." Jaden nodded, adding something to his sketch. "That's how I feel about drawing when my hands shake too much. Like the pictures are stuck inside, waiting." The honesty of their fears touched Lucas deeply. These children, who had faced so much uncertainty, still clung to their passions with remarkable determination. He thought about the DNA results sitting in his briefcase back at the office, wondering how to tell them about their heritage without adding to their burdens. They spent the next hour moving through the park at a leisurely pace, stopping whenever something caught their interest. Aaliyah was drawn to the musicians, while Jaden filled page after page with sketches of trees, people, and buildings. Lucas found himself seeing the familiar park through new eyes, noticing details he'd overlooked in his usual rushed visits. As the sun climbed higher, Lucas noticed both children starting to tire. "Time to head back," he announced, pulling out his phone to call their driver. The twins didn't protest, another sign of their fatigue, but their faces glowed with quiet contentment. The drive back to the hospital was peaceful, both children dozing lightly in the back seat. Lucas used the time to check his messages, freezing when he saw an unmarked envelope had been delivered to his office. The message inside was brief but chilling. "The Bennett secrets stay buried. Walk away from the twins." Looking at the sleeping children, Lucas felt a surge of protective anger. Someone knew he discovered the truth about their heritage and was trying to intimidate him into abandoning them. The thought was absurd. In the weeks since he'd met them, the twins had become more than just a responsibility or a family obligation. They had awakened something in him, a desire to protect and nurture that he hadn't known he possessed. As they pulled up to the hospital, Aaliyah stirred. "Can we do this again?" she asked sleepily. "Maybe next time we can visit an art museum for Jaden?" "Of course," Lucas replied, carefully keeping the tension from his voice. There's so much more of the city for you both to see. Watching them return to their room, Lucas's mind raced with plans. He needed to increase security without alarming the twins, investigate the source of the threat while maintaining their normal routine, and somehow find the right moment to tell them about their true identity. The weight of these responsibilities should have felt overwhelming, but instead, it strengthened his resolve. He pulled out his phone again, this time to call his head of security. The twins deserved to focus on healing and pursuing their passions, not worrying about unnamed threats. As he waited for the call to connect, Lucas made a silent promise to the children who had unexpectedly become such an important part of his life. No one would hurt them, not while he was around to prevent it. Margaret Bennett's drawing room remained unchanged since Lucas's childhood, the antique furniture and heavy drapes creating an atmosphere of preserved time. Lucas found his mother exactly where he expected, perched elegantly on her favorite wingback chair, the threatening letter he'd received held delicately between her manicured fingers. "You went looking into Alexander's disappearance," she stated, her voice carrying the weight of decades of carefully maintained secrets. "I warned you about disturbing the past, Lucas. Those children in the hospital are Alexander's grandchildren," Lucas countered, remaining standing despite his mother's gesture toward a chair. "They're fighting for their lives while we sit on resources that could help them. Resources that are rightfully theirs." Margaret's composure cracked slightly. "You don't understand the complications. Alexander's disappearance wasn't a simple matter of him abandoning the family. There were agreements made, documents signed, lives at stake." "What kind of agreements justify abandoning 2 children to the foster system?" Lucas demanded, his voice rising. "They're Bennett's, mother. Aaliyah has Aunt Claire's talent for dance, and Jaden's artistic ability matches grandfather's exactly." The sound of a floorboard creaking interrupted their confrontation. Lucas turned to find Aaliyah and Jaden standing in the doorway, their faces pale with shock. They had convinced their nurse to bring them to the mansion for a surprise visit, only to walk into their own family history being debated. "You know who we are?" Aaliyah's voice trembled slightly. "You know about our family?" Margaret rose swiftly, her face transforming into the polite mask she wore for social occasions. "Children, this is a complicated adult matter. Perhaps you should return to the hospital." But Jaden, typically quiet, stepped forward. "We have a right to know," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We've never had answers about where we came from. Please." Lucas moved to stand beside the twins, physically demonstrating his allegiance. "They deserve the truth, mother. All of it." Instead of responding, Margaret left the room abruptly, the sharp click of her heels echoing through the mansion. Lucas started to follow, but Aaliyah grabbed his sleeve. "We found something," she whispered. "While we were waiting, we explored the library." Jaden noticed a book that looked different from the others. Jaden pulled a worn leather journal from his backpack. "It has our grandmother's name in it," he explained. "Elizabeth Bennett. The dates match when our father would have been young." Lucas took the journal carefully, recognizing his aunt's handwriting on the first page. As they gathered around a small table, he began to read entries that painted a picture of a family fracturing under the weight of its own ambitions. Elizabeth's words revealed a story of twin brothers, Richard and Alexander Bennett, whose close relationship became strained by their father's manipulative business practices. Richard, Lucas's grandfather, had followed their father's path, while Alexander had rebelled against the family's increasingly questionable methods of maintaining their fortune. The final entries spoke of Alexander's discovery of documents that implicated the Bennett patriarch in serious financial misconduct. But before he could expose the truth, Alexander vanished. Elizabeth's last entry suggested that he had been forced to choose between exposing the family's crimes and protecting his own young family. "Your grandfather didn't abandon the family," Lucas realized, speaking gently to the twins. "He was trying to protect your father, to give him a chance at a life away from the Bennett legacy." But something went wrong, Jaden concluded, his artistic mind piecing together the story's fragments. "Our father never knew the truth, did he? That's why we ended up in foster care." Aaliyah hugged the journal to her chest. "Does this mean we really are Bennetts? That we belong somewhere?" Before Lucas could respond, a shadow fell across the doorway. His mother stood there, holding a thick folder. Her face showed resignation, mixed with something that might have been relief. "There's more," Margaret said quietly. "If you truly want to understand your heritage, you need to see these documents. But I warn you, some truths come with obligations, and some revelations can't be undone." Lucas looked at the twins, seeing in their faces the same determination he'd first noticed in the hospital. "We're ready," he answered for all of them. "Whatever the truth is, we'll face it together." The afternoon light faded as they delved deeper into the Bennett family's hidden history, each revelation bringing them closer to understanding the forces that had shaped their lives and the challenges they would have to face to reclaim their rightful place in the family. The following days found Lucas, Aaliyah, and Jaden huddled in the mansion's library, Elizabeth's journal spread before them alongside Margaret's documents. The leather-bound journal had become their roadmap to understanding the complex web of Bennett family history, each entry revealing new layers of their shared past. Lucas watched as Aaliyah traced her finger along a family tree they'd reconstructed, her medical bracelet a stark reminder of their ongoing challenges. "According to these dates," she said, "our father would have been just a child when Alexander disappeared. But why didn't anyone look for us after our parents' accident?" The question had been haunting Lucas since they'd begun their investigation. The answer emerged from a series of letters tucked into the back of Elizabeth's journal. The correspondence revealed that Alexander had created new identities for his family, believing it was the only way to protect them from the fallout of his discoveries about the Bennett patriarch's illegal activities. "Your grandfather was thorough," Lucas explained, spreading out the letters. He used his knowledge of the family's business practices to hide his tracks. The irony is that the same skills he learned while working for the family enabled him to disappear so completely. Jaden, who had been quietly sketching the scenes described in the journal, looked up. "But someone found us anyway. That's why we're getting these warnings, isn't it?" Lucas nodded grimly. His security team had traced the threatening letters to a private investigator working for Thomas Blackwood, a name that appeared repeatedly in the family documents. Thomas was the son of James Blackwood, who had been the Bennett patriarch's business partner until a mysterious falling out had left the Blackwoods stripped of their share in the company. "Thomas believes he was cheated out of his inheritance," Lucas explained, choosing his words carefully. "The documents Alexander discovered didn't just implicate our grandfather in financial misconduct. They revealed that the Blackwoods were the ones who had actually built much of the Bennett fortune through their innovations. Our grandfather used legal manipulation to push them out." As if summoned by this revelation, Lucas's phone buzzed with an alert from his security team. They discovered that Thomas had been monitoring the hospital where the twins were receiving treatment, gathering information about their condition and their connection to Lucas. The twins exchanged worried glances, but their determination remained unshaken. "He doesn't just want the money, does he?" Aaliyah asked, her insight surprising Lucas. "He wants to use us to prove what happened to his family. We're evidence," Jaden added quietly, adding dark shadows to his sketch of the Blackwood estate he'd found in old photographs. "If we're Alexander's grandchildren, and Alexander had proof of what happened." Lucas leaned forward, his protective instincts surging. "But Thomas is underestimating us. He thinks you're just children he can manipulate. He doesn't understand that you're Bennetts, with all the strength that entails." Their research was interrupted by Margaret's unexpected entrance. Her face was tense as she placed a freshly delivered envelope on the table. Inside was a formal invitation to the annual Bennett Foundation Gala, along with a handwritten note from Thomas Blackwood. "Bring the children. It's time for the truth to be known." The challenge was clear, but so was the trap. The gala would be filled with New York's elite, people whose fortunes were intertwined with the Bennett legacy. Any revelation about the family's past could trigger a chain reaction of legal and financial consequences. Lucas studied the twins' faces, seeing not fear but a familiar determination. These children, who had faced illness and abandonment with unwavering courage, were ready to face whatever came next. The Bennett blood in their veins wasn't just about inheritance. It was about resilience, about standing up for truth even when it came at a personal cost. "We can't hide forever," Aaliyah said, her voice steady. "And I want to know everything about who we are, even the hard parts." Jaden nodded, adding final touches to his sketch, a drawing of the three of them standing together, shadows looming behind them but light streaming in from ahead. "We're stronger together," he said simply. Looking at these remarkable children who had become such an important part of his life, Lucas made his decision. They would attend the gala, but on their own terms. It was time to show Thomas Blackwood that the new generation of Bennetts wouldn't be manipulated or threatened into submission. As they began planning their strategy, Lucas silently thanked whatever twist of fate had led him to that hospital room. The twins might have entered his life as patients needing help, but they had become something far more valuable. They were family, and together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the private wing of the hospital, Aaliyah sat at the window, watching dance videos on the tablet Lucas had given her. Her usual enthusiasm was subdued, replaced by a quiet frustration that manifested in the tight grip she maintained on the device. Lucas, who had been reviewing some documents, noticed the change in her demeanor immediately. "The steps don't feel the same anymore," Aaliyah admitted before Lucas could ask. "I try to practice the basic positions, but my body feels different after all the treatments. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever dance like I used to." The vulnerability in her voice struck Lucas deeply. Despite her usual confident demeanor, she was still a young girl facing enormous challenges. In the next bed, Jaden lowered his sketchbook, his own struggles evident in the tremor of his hands as he set down his pencil. "The medications make my hands shake," Jaden confessed, looking at his latest drawing with critical eyes. "The lines aren't coming out right. Everything looks wobbly, not clean like before." His frustration was visible in the crumpled papers scattered around his bed, each bearing the marks of abandoned attempts. Lucas pulled a chair between their beds, considering his response carefully. These weren't just artistic setbacks, they represented the twins' fears about their identities and futures. Their talents had been constant companions through years in the foster system, defining who they were when everything else remained uncertain. "Art isn't just about technical perfection," Lucas began, reaching for one of Jaden's discarded sketches. "Look at this trembling line here. It adds emotion movement. It tells the story of your struggle and your persistence. That's more powerful than any perfectly straight line could be." Turning to Aaliyah, he continued, "And dance isn't just about executing perfect moves. It's about expressing what you feel, telling a story through movement. Your body is fighting a battle right now, and that's part of your story too." Instead of offering empty reassurances, Lucas suggested a different approach. He brought in an easel and set it up in their room, encouraging Jaden to try larger movements that wouldn't be as affected by the tremors. For Aaliyah, he arranged for videos of seated dance performances, showing her how expression could transcend physical limitations. "I want to organize an exhibition," Lucas announced one evening, after watching Jaden work on a particularly striking series of hospital-inspired drawings. "Not just of your artwork, Jaden, but of both your journeys. We could display your drawings alongside videos of Aaliyah's dance practice, showing how you're both adapting and growing." The suggestion sparked something in both twins. Jaden began experimenting with different media, finding that charcoal allowed for broader strokes that accommodated his tremors while adding emotional depth to his work. Aaliyah started choreographing movements that worked within her current limitations, incorporating her medical equipment into the performance in a way that transformed it from an impediment into a prop. As they worked on their pieces, the twins began opening up about deeper fears. "Sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing," Aaliyah confessed during a late-night conversation. "Like the girl who used to dance 6 hours a day is fading away, and I don't know who's taking her place." Jaden nodded in agreement. "It's like we're becoming different people. Not just because of the medicine, but because of everything we're learning about our family. Sometimes I draw our old foster homes, trying to remember who we were before we knew about being Bennetts." Lucas listened to their concerns, understanding the weight of identity they carried. They weren't just dealing with medical challenges or artistic frustrations. They were navigating the complex waters of self-discovery while processing revelations about their heritage. "Who you are isn't limited to what you can do," Lucas told them, his voice carrying the warmth of genuine affection. "You're not just dancers or artists or Bennetts. You're survivors, fighters, and two of the bravest people I've ever met. Everything you're going through now is adding to who you are, not taking anything away." The twins absorbed his words, their bond with Lucas growing stronger through these shared moments of vulnerability. He had become more than a benefactor or even a newly discovered relative. He was becoming the stable, supportive parent figure they had never had. As they continued working on their pieces for the exhibition, their artistic expressions began to reflect this evolution. Jaden's drawings incorporated themes of family and belonging, while Aaliyah's dance movements told stories of transformation and resilience. Through their art, they were processing not just their medical journey, but their emotional one as well. Lucas watched their progress with pride, knowing that these moments of sharing and growth were strengthening them for the challenges that still lay ahead. The looming confrontation with Thomas Blackwood and the mysteries of their family history would require all their combined strength, but for now, they were learning perhaps the most important lesson, that true identity isn't fixed in stone but grows and evolves through every challenge and change. The grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art buzzed with New York's elite, their conversations creating a constant undercurrent of whispers and speculation. Lucas stood at the entrance, adjusting his tie while scanning the crowd for any sign of Thomas Blackwood. Their investigation had revealed troubling patterns in Thomas's business dealings, suggesting a man consumed by his perceived birthright. Security personnel, disguised as regular guests, maintained discreet positions throughout the venue. Lucas had insisted on extensive protective measures. Though he knew the real threat wouldn't come from physical violence, Thomas Blackwood was too sophisticated for that. The danger lay in information, in carefully orchestrated revelations designed to destroy reputations and fortunes. The atmosphere shifted perceptibly when Thomas made his entrance. Tall and distinguished, with silver threading through his dark hair, he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to wielding power. His gaze locked onto Lucas immediately, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes spread across his face as he approached. "Lucas Bennett," Thomas said, his voice carrying just far enough to draw the attention of nearby guests. "I see you came alone. Are your young wards not feelin' well enough to attend?" The careful emphasis he placed on wards made Lucas's jaw tighten. "The twins are resting," he replied evenly. "Their health remains our primary concern." Thomas's smile widened fractionally. Their health has always been a fascinating subject. Rare genetic conditions can be so illuminating about family histories, don't you find? He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Did you know that the same condition affected my father's side of the family? A rather specific genetic marker, passed down through the Blackwood line." The pieces clicked into place in Lucas's mind. Thomas wasn't just after the Bennett fortune. He was using the twins' medical condition as proof of his family's connection to the Bennett empire. Their illness, the very thing that had brought them into Lucas's life, was evidence of the historic merger between the Bennett and Blackwood families, a merger that had ended in the Blackwoods' disinheritance. "Their children, Thomas," Lucas said quietly, steel underlying his words. "Whatever grievances you have with our family's past, they shouldn't bear the weight of it." Thomas's expression hardened. "They're living proof of what was stolen from my family. Their very existence, their illness, proves that the innovations my grandfather developed, the medical research that built the initial Bennett fortune, came from the Blackwood side. Your grandfather didn't just steal our money, Lucas. He stole our legacy." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the entrance. Aaliyah and Jaden stood in the doorway, dressed in formal attire that couldn't quite hide the medical monitoring devices they still wore. They had insisted on coming, understanding instinctively that their absence would be interpreted as weakness. Thomas's eyes lit up with an unsettling intensity. "Ah, here they are. My property, in a manner of speaking. Did Lucas tell you about the medical trust your grandfather Alexander discovered? The one that specified that in the event of a Blackwood heir displaying the family's genetic marker, all associated research and patents would revert to Blackwood control." The twins moved to stand beside Lucas, their presence adding strength to his position. "We know about the trust, Aaliyah said clearly, her voice carrying in the now silent ballroom. "We also know it was invalidated when our grandfather proved the research was based on unethical trials." Jaden stepped forward, his artist's eye catching the subtle shift in Thomas's expression. "You're not fighting for justice," he said quietly. "You're trying to bury the truth about what your family did to get those patents in the first place." Thomas's composure cracked for a moment, revealing a glimpse of the desperation beneath his polished exterior. "You belong to me," he hissed, low enough that only their small group could hear. "Your condition, your very blood, makes you Blackwood property. And I will use every resource at my disposal to prove it." The threat hung in the air, but it had lost its power. The twins stood tall despite their medical challenges, their Bennett heritage evident in more than just their genes. They were no longer just victims of circumstance, but active participants in their own story. Lucas placed a protective hand on each twin's shoulder, feeling their strength flowing into him even as he supported them. "You've made your position clear, Thomas," he said. "Now let me make mine equally clear. These children are under my protection. Any move against them will be met with the full force of not just the Bennett fortune, but the Bennett family. A family that has learned from its past mistakes and grown stronger for it." The confrontation marked a turning point, though none of them fully understood it yet. Thomas had revealed his true motives, but in doing so, he had also exposed his vulnerabilities. The twins' presence had transformed what could have been a simple power play into something more complex, a battle not just for fortune and legacy, but for the right to define their own identity and future. The morning after the gala confrontation, Lucas found himself in his mother's study, where the morning light cast long shadows across generations of Bennett family portraits. Margaret Bennett sat rigidly in her chair, her fingers wrapped tightly around a crystal glass that she hadn't lifted to her lips. "Those children have no idea what kind of danger they're walking into," Margaret declared, her voice carrying the weight of decades of carefully guarded secrets. "Thomas Blackwood isn't just after money or recognition. He wants to destroy everything we've built. The twins' medical condition gives him leverage he never had before." Lucas studied his mother's face, seeing beyond her practiced socialite mask to the genuine fear beneath. Their family mother. More than that, their children who have already lost too much. "We can't abandon them now." "Family?" Margaret's laugh held no humor. "The Bennett family name was built on carefully calculated decisions, Lucas. Your grandfather understood that. He knew when to cut ties to protect the whole. Even Alexander's disappearance was ultimately about preservation." Their argument was interrupted by the sudden appearance of one of the security staff, his professional demeanor cracking with urgency. "Mr. Bennett, the twins, they've left the hospital. They disabled their monitoring devices and somehow slipped past the guards." Lucas felt his heart constrict. He knew immediately where they had gone. The old Bennett mansion, the one mentioned repeatedly in Elizabeth's journal, stood abandoned on the outskirts of the city. The twins had been fascinated by the references to a hidden study where Alexander had discovered the damning evidence against both families. Within minutes, Lucas was in his car, breaking speed limits as he raced toward the mansion. His mind raced through all the dangers, the twins' fragile health, the unstable structure of the old house, and the possibility that Thomas Blackwood might have predicted this move. The Bennett mansion loomed ahead, its Victorian architecture a testament to past glory now faded by neglect. Lucas found the side door ajar, small footprints visible in the dust. Following the trail, he made his way to the second floor, where Elizabeth's journal had described a concealed room behind the main library. He found the twins in what had once been Alexander's private study. Decades of dust covered everything, but Aaliyah and Jaden had already discovered a hidden compartment behind an old painting. They were so absorbed in examining its contents that they didn't hear Lucas approach. "We had to know," Aaliyah said without turning around, sensing his presence. The journal kept mentioning files that Alexander hid here, documents that proved what both families did to get their patents. Jaden held up a stack of yellowed papers, his hands trembling slightly from more than just his condition. "It's all here, Lucas. Medical records, research notes, letters between the families. They were experimenting on people, using orphanages and poor houses as testing grounds for their treatments. Both families were involved. Lucas moved closer, taking in the gravity of their discovery. The documents revealed a history darker than any of them had imagined. The rare genetic condition that affected the twins hadn't just been studied by their ancestors. It had been deliberately tracked through generations of vulnerable families, with both the Bennetts and Blackwoods using their influence to cover up the unethical research. "This is why Alexander disappeared," Aaliyah whispered, her medical knowledge helping her understand the implications. "He didn't just find evidence of financial fraud. He discovered that our condition, the one that Thomas claims proves their ownership of us, was the result of their experiments." Lucas felt the weight of this revelation set over them. The twins had uncovered a truth that changed everything, but it had come at a cost. Their faces showed the strain of their unauthorized expedition, and he could see that both were struggling to maintain their strength. "Let's get you back to the hospital," he said gently, gathering the documents. "But first, I want you to know something. What our ancestors did was unforgivable, but it doesn't define who we are now. You two have shown more courage and integrity than generations of Bennetts and Blackwoods combined." As they made their way carefully back to the car, Lucas realized that this discovery marked a turning point. The twins weren't just fighting for their place in the family anymore. They were confronting a legacy of moral corruption that had affected both families. Their inheritance wasn't just about money or status. It was about the responsibility to right historical wrongs and forge a new path forward. The mansion's library became their war room in the days following their discovery. Lucas arranged for the twins to continue their treatments through private medical staff, allowing them to remain at the mansion while they processed the documents they'd found. The walls were now covered with timeline charts and family trees, connecting decades of carefully hidden secrets. The agreement between Thomas's grandfather and our great-grandfather wasn't just about money, Aaliyah explained, her medical knowledge helping her interpret the old research notes. She sat wrapped in a blanket, her tablet displaying modern medical journals that corresponded with the historical documents. They were tracking specific genetic markers through multiple generations. Our condition wasn't random, it was inherited from the families they studied. Lucas watched as Jaden added another sketch to their evidence wall, a haunting illustration of the orphanage mentioned in the oldest documents. The boy's artistic talent had captured the institutional coldness described in the records, but he'd also included small details that humanized the children who had lived there: a worn teddy bear, a makeshift ball, a flower growing through sidewalk cracks. Thomas knew about all of this, Lucas realized, connecting the final pieces. His claim about the medical trust wasn't about proving his family's right to the fortune. It was about preventing us from looking too closely at where that fortune came from. If we fought him on the trust, we'd expose everything. The sound of footsteps interrupted their discussion. Margaret Bennett stood in the doorway, her usual perfectly maintained appearance showing signs of strain. In her hands, she held a leather portfolio that Lucas recognized from his father's study. "There's something else you need to see," Margaret said, her voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Your grandfather, Alexander. He didn't just disappear. He made a choice, one that I've spent decades trying to understand." She opened the portfolio, revealing a series of letters. "He contacted me before he left, asking me to protect certain documents. I never read them until today." The letters revealed a complex plan. Alexander had discovered the truth about the medical research, but he'd also found something else. Evidence that some of the affected families had survived, their descendants still carrying the genetic markers of those unethical experiments. He had spent years tracking them, trying to find a way to make amends. "The final letter," Margaret continued, drawing out a worn envelope, was written the day before he disappeared. He had located several families and set up trust funds for them, hidden under layers of shell companies. But he knew that wasn't enough. The research was continuing, with new generations being monitored without their knowledge. Aaliyah leaned forward, her medical alert bracelet catching the light. "That's why he disappeared, to protect the families he'd found, including our father." "Yes," Margaret confirmed. But there's more. Alexander made an agreement with Thomas's father. In exchange for his silence about the ongoing research, James Blackwood would ensure that any children born with a genetic marker would receive medical care through a network of specialized clinics. That's why you two were placed in specific foster homes, always near certain medical facilities. The revelation landed heavily in the room. The twins' entire life trajectory, their medical care, their placements, even their eventual arrival at the hospital where Lucas found them, had been part of Alexander's long-term strategy to protect them while maintaining the silence that kept other families safe. But Thomas broke that agreement, Jaden said quietly, adding subtle shadows to his sketch that somehow made it more poignant. He's not honoring his father's promise. He's trying to use us to regain control of everything. Lucas moved to stand between the twins, his protective instinct stronger than ever. The question now is, what do we do with this knowledge? Alexander's silence protected people, but it also allowed the cover-up to continue. Is that the legacy we want to preserve? The twins exchanged a look that spoke of years of shared struggles and silent understanding. We need to find the other families, Aaliyah said firmly. Not to expose them, but to give them the choice Alexander never had, the choice to know their own history and decide for themselves what to do with that knowledge. It's not just about the money or the research anymore, Jaden added, his quiet voice carrying unexpected strength. It's about telling the truth in a way that helps people instead of hurting them. Margaret watched this exchange with a mixture of pride and trepidation. You understand this decision will change everything? Not just for our family, but for everyone connected to this history. The twins nodded, their determination evident in their unified response. Together with Lucas, they began formulating a plan that would honor Alexander's protective instincts while bringing the truth to light in a way that would help, not harm, those affected by their family's past actions. The late autumn wind whipped around the Bennett Foundation building as Lucas arrived for what would become a defining moment in their family's history. The twins had been discharged from the hospital 2 days earlier, their conditions finally stabilized enough for outpatient treatment. Their improved health had come just in time for this confrontation. Security footage showed Thomas Blackwood entering the building 20 minutes earlier, heading straight for the private conference room where decades of secrets would finally surface. What Thomas didn't know was that the twins had already set their own plan in motion, one that would transform the very nature of their inheritance. Lucas found Aaliyah and Jaden waiting in his office, both dressed formally for the occasion. Aaliyah wore a simple black dress that made her look older than her years, while Jaden had chosen a suit that reminded Lucas startlingly of old photos of Alexander. The resemblance wasn't coincidental. They had carefully crafted every detail of this meeting. The documents are ready, Aaliyah confirmed, indicating a thick folder on Lucas's desk. We found all 17 families affected by the original research. Each one has been contacted discreetly and given the option to participate in the new medical foundation. Jaden pulled out his latest sketch, a detailed organizational chart that showed how they plan to restructure both the Bennett and Blackwood medical assets. The lawyers confirmed it this morning. Once we reveal Alexander's letter about the trust fund, Thomas loses any claim to control the research. Their plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of fighting Thomas's claim to the medical patents, they would dissolve them entirely, transferring all research and resources into a new nonprofit foundation dedicated to treating and supporting families affected by the genetic condition. The foundation would be governed by a board that included representatives from the affected families, medical experts, and ethics specialists. As they made their way to the conference room, Lucas reflected on how much the twins had grown since that first hospital meeting. Their shared struggles had forged them into something remarkable, leaders who understood both the weight of responsibility and the importance of compassion. Thomas Blackwood waited for them, his confident smile faltering slightly when he saw the twins enter with Lucas. Before he could speak, Aaliyah stepped forward, placing a single envelope on the table. "This letter is from our grandmother," she said clearly. "Not Elizabeth Bennett, but Marie Blackwood, your aunt, Thomas. The one who helped Alexander create the original trust fund for the affected families." The revelation hit Thomas like a physical blow. His Aunt Marie had disappeared the same year as Alexander, her absence another wound in the Blackwood family history. As he read the letter, His hands began to shake. She was part of it, he whispered, his carefully constructed world visibly crumbling. She helped hide the families? She and Alexander worked together, Jaden explained, his quiet voice carrying unexpected authority. They fell in love while investigating what both their families had done. When they discovered the truth, they chose to protect the victims rather than preserve the family fortunes. Lucas watched as understanding dawned in Thomas's eyes. The twins weren't just BILLIONAIRES. They were also Blackwoods, descendants of both families through Alexander and Marie's secret marriage. Their very existence represented the union of the families that had once torn each other apart. But the final twist in their shared history came from an unexpected source. Margaret Bennett stepped into the room, carrying a document that made Thomas sink into his chair. "Your mother knew," Margaret said softly. "She helped Marie and Alexander establish the medical clinics that have been caring for affected families all these years. The agreement you found, Thomas, about the medical trust? It wasn't about ownership. It was a cover story to ensure continued funding for those clinics without exposing the families." The truth shifted everything. Thomas wasn't just facing the descendants of a rival family. He was confronting the reality that his own family had chosen healing over wealth, redemption over power. His mother and aunt had been part of a decades-long effort to make amends for past wrongs, an effort he had nearly destroyed in his quest for revenge. As they presented their plan for the new foundation, Lucas saw the change in Thomas. The man who had arrived intent on claiming ownership left understanding that true inheritance wasn't about control. It was about responsibility and the choice to do better than those who came before. The twins' victory wasn't just in preserving their place in the family or protecting their inheritance. They had accomplished something far more significant. They had transformed a legacy of secrecy and harm into one of healing and hope. Their story would continue, not as hidden heirs fighting for recognition, but as leaders of a new chapter in both families' histories. Looking at Aaliyah and Jaden, who had faced illness, abandonment, and threats with unwavering courage, Lucas felt profound gratitude for the twist of fate that had led him to their hospital room. They had started as patients needing help and become the teachers who showed both families the true meaning of legacy, not what you take from the past, but what you choose to build for the future.